I love Walter. He's always been my sort of favorite quote unquote character from King of Kong. He's just this quirky, interesting, truly good person.
Ed, this is a joy to speak with you. Thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. Appreciate your time, Steve. Thank you.
Honestly, this here, well, I mean, today we're speaking with Ed Cunningham, director of Arcades and Love Songs, The Ballad of Walter Day, which is so charming. Um, it is so wildly different. Of course, this is a sequel to King of Kong, but almost a side quest, if you will, at the same time. Why tell Walter's story now? Why revive the King of Kong world?
We really had no interest in reviving King of Kong at all. You know, there was the cheating scandal and the lawsuits that came about, and everyone kept saying, "Oh, you need to do a follow up to the King of Kong," and we just had no interest in that. You know, we made the movie, we wanted to stand on its own, but when Walter got pulled into that lawsuit and got, you know, it's just such a frivolous, ridiculous lawsuit that he got pulled into. Billy Mitchell called me and he said, "Hey, you know, your movie is having a really bad impact on this guy. What are you going to do?" And so I got involved with the group that was helping him put together his defense of the lawsuit. I started getting on sort of regular conference calls. There was, and they're in the film, this mobile game called Color Switch. The two brothers, David and Chris Reichelt, who were in the film, they became a part of helping with his lawsuit because they were big fans of King of Kong. They'd become friends with Billy and Walter. And so we were on one of those calls. And again, no idea of making a film, just really trying to help. I love Walter. He's always been my sort of favorite quote unquote character from King of Kong. He's just this quirky, interesting, truly good person. I mean, there's just not a bad bone in his body. He's just a good, solid human. And you know, we had a little bit of a bumpy relationship. He was not happy with the King of Kong. He felt like it was too one-sided. He shared that, you know, he felt like we slanted the story. And, you know, so he had shared with me over the years that even though the King of Kong had, and he appreciated it, he understood why people liked it, but he had shared with me, you know, I don't really like what you guys did.
Hmm.
And so when I got involved with the lawsuit, it was more just because, you know, the longer you make films, documentaries about people, the more you have to take responsibility for what it does to their lives. You can't just make a movie about someone, put it out, and walk away. And so I got involved with the lawsuit and just helping sort of with the strategy. And the lawsuit was so ridiculous. So I was, you know, reading through it, going, no, because they were making all these claims about the King of Kong. So I was going through the lawsuit. Nope, that's not true. That's not true. You know, I have things that can back that up. And it was on one of those calls that the guys from Color Switch said, "Hey, did you know that we're paying for Walter to finally record his music?" And anybody who's seen The King of Kong may remember in that movie, Walter's playing his guitar. He plays this song in front of a barn in Iowa. And he talks about how he doesn't, I'm not really this video game guy anymore. I want to be an artist. I don't want to be a referee. I want to be an artist up there singing my songs. So here we are. It's been 20 years since we started filming with Walter back in 2005. Here we were in July of 2022, and this guy says, "Hey, you know, we're paying for his album. Maybe you should make a documentary about Walter making his music." And we started filming a month later. We were in the studio. I mean, honestly, it didn't take me but maybe a day before I realized I kind of have to make this movie. You know, if we're going to follow through and help tell this guy's story, this sweetheart of a guy who had a massive impact on video game culture in our society, it almost felt like an obligation to make the movie, not a choice. And it really, Walter even said this while we were filming. He said, "You know, this movie's kind of written itself, hasn't it?" Because he was already making his album.
Yeah.
We already had this lawsuit with these great stakes, you know, and he was getting ready to plan this live show that he did at the end of the movie. And it really was, of all the movies I've ever made, This one had the clearest path. It had the clearest narrative. A lot of time, I mean, King of Kong, we filmed 8 different gamers before we settled in on Billy and Steve. I mean, we had
Really?
hours of footage of other gamers, yeah, because we didn't know what the best story was going to be while we were filming. But this one was so clearly, this is about Walter. It's about his lawsuit, and it's about him finally fulfilling his dream that he shared with us for the first time in King of Kong. So it really felt like, and I don't mean obligation in a bad way. I mean it was an opportunity as well. I mean I know the fan base. I know that there's a lot of people who love King of Kong, and I think you mentioned it at the top. You know, this is not the King of Kong. This is not that story. It is a story about a guy trying to be a singer songwriter. It couldn't be more different than the King of Kong. Yet it is, it's the same people. It is the father of esports. Um, and in some ways, in a lot of ways, it's a much broader story. I mean, it's about a guy having his heart broken. It's about breakup and reconciliation. It's about finally following through on this dream you've had your whole life of becoming a singer songwriter, writing a book, acting in a play, whatever that dream is. For a guy in his 70s to do that is quite extraordinary. And so for me, it became this both obligation and opportunity because it was about Walter. I didn't want to make King of Kong 2. There's a whole mini series that can be made about what happened after King of Kong. I was really more interested in Walter and his story.
Well, it's deliberately not called King of Kong, Return to the Quarters or anything. This is his story. This is Frasier to your Cheers, if you
Yes,
will, and just as successful. Like you cannot help but fall in love with Walter Day.
I know.
He's just
Yeah.
amazing. What is the magic of Walter to you?
It is rare, if ever, that we encounter someone who is as selfless as Walter is. He's just got this, and he's got this magnetism about him. It's not like, it's not like he's some wallflower just sitting on the corner and, he's got a personality. He's great on the mic when he's doing in the final show in the movie. He had to get through a lot of nervousness at the start of the show. And the way he did that was he just started riffing with the audience, and it was all his friends, and they started supporting him, and it got him better. But it's just rare to find someone who's this selfless and has spent his entire life turning the spotlight on others. And that was really, for me, the biggest piece to this story is here's this guy who has spent his entire life bringing attention to others, and then they turned around and supported him and were there for him when it was his time in the spotlight. And that was really what we tried to convey in that final scene at the show is this group of people, including Billy Mitchell, who a lot of people have very negative opinions about, but Billy was right there as his friend. Billy was a very true friend through Walter. He didn't abandon him during the lawsuit, totally supported him for his music career, showed up there in Iowa to support him. And that was really kind of it's such an odd couple. Billy and Walter could not be more different people, but yet they're lifelong friends. And I think that really comes through, especially the way Billy's there to support him. The end of the show, when Walter gets done, everyone's clapping. The first person who walks up is Billy, and he says, "You did it." Because that's all Walter wanted to do. He just wanted to be on stage and singing. And Billy really said that so succinctly. So it was just a nice moment for us to end that show with the first guy on stage to hug him was Billy Mitchell.
It's really amazing to see that relationship because, I mean, the picture we have of Billy really is King of Kong. And he is the term villain may not be the right term, but he's a complex character. Let's put it that way. And then you've just got this with Walter, you seem
Yeah,
like this person that's just completely pure and just so genuine in everything. I think
yeah,
they say I think the line is that basically no ego and this tremendous power to attract attention at the same time. Um, it it's truly
yeah,
special. It's truly
yeah.
special.
He's got a magnetism about him, no doubt. Yeah, yeah. And Billy, you know, Billy's a much different guy today than we filmed with back in 2005, 2006. I mean, he could be really brash. He could be, and back then there were five different documentary crews following that world when we got there. And so he was very standoffish with us, because he had all these camera crews show up and nothing ever came of them. And then we showed up and he's like, "Oh, great, another documentary crew who's not going to make a film. They're going to say they're going to make a film, it's never going to get made." And what I encountered this time was a totally different person. He's a much more mellow, more supportive, and a truly, truly good friend to Walter. If that wasn't the case, if this became a showcase for Billy to, prance around and do his Billy thing, I would not have been interested in making a movie. But that wasn't what I found. I found someone who, at first, I mean, Billy drilled me. He's like, "Well, how much are you doing? Is this just going to go back to this stuff?" And I just told him, I was like, "Billy, no, this is about Walter.
Yeah.
Yes, we are going to talk about the cheating scandal. Yes, we're going to talk about the lawsuit, but only in regards to how it impacts Walter." And at first, Billy was very hesitant. He didn't like how the first film made. It was like, "Hey, you've already made one film about me that I don't like. I'm not going to let you make a second one." And when he knew that that wasn't my intent, that I was, and it took a couple of months. I mean, and his son, who's in the film, called me a couple of times. He's like, "Hey, we're really concerned that this is just a backdoor way to do more about the controversy." They were concerned about that, and rightfully so. And I just kept telling them. And then every time I showed up, we were talking about Walter. I was interviewing Billy about Walter, not about himself. And they finally got this comfort with me because, I mean, look, the movie hasn't been, Billy's not Billy without the movie, but it also was hurtful at times. He did feel like he was portrayed in a negative light. We feel like it was a truthful light, but that his opinion's different. But they were really hesitant. But once they saw my true intention was to really focus on Walter, Billy completely leaned in. He's been such a great supporter. He's been so positive. He's been flying himself around. He came. We have a screening at TCL Chinese Theater next Thursday. He's flying out for that. He's just been so supportive of it. And he was a totally different guy this time around.
That's cool. That's cool. I would love to hear too about the involvement of Billy's ex-girlfriend. I cannot think of her name. I'm sorry. The one who broke his heart.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Walter's ex-girlfriend. Yeah,
Walter,
Shane
sorry, I said
Harris.
Billy.
Yeah.
Walter, yes.
Yeah. 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 I had been hearing from Walter about this woman who broke his heart back in the mid 80s. You'd heard him tell that story so many times. And it's funny, there's clips in this movie that we pulled from the DVD extras because we did a whole extended thing about his music on a DVD extra for that film. And it almost becomes like this mythical story. Like, oh, there's this woman way back in the day, and it's like this faceless, nameless heartbreaker. And Walter called me about a month into filming, and he said, "Hey, I want to reach out to the woman and see if she'll participate. What do you think?" And I was like, "Yeah, I would love that." I said, "But she broke your heart. Let's see what happens." And so he called me one day and he said, "Hey, she's waiting for your call. Here's her phone number." And the woman's name is Shane Harris. And I called her. Now, mind you, she had no idea that she had inspired all this music. It had been 38 years since they live in the same town, so they'd seen each other occasionally, but they had no communication other than bumping into each other at the grocery store. And this woman absolutely changes the entire depth and meaning of this movie. Without her participation, we don't have anything close to the depth. And I mean, it's very emotional. We have a scene where we'd interviewed with her and she said, "Hey, where are you going?" We go, "Oh, we're going to Walter." She goes, "Well, I'm going to go with you. I want to surprise him." And as a filmmaker, you're like, "Yep, that'd be great. Let's make sure your mic's on. Let's make sure the battery's changed." Yeah, she goes into the house, and John Perkins, who was the director of photography and a producer, he was the only one who could fit in the room with them. So I had to sit down the hallway. I could barely hear what was going on. And John came out of that and he goes, "I don't know that I've ever filmed something that personal." I mean, here were two people who hadn't talked really for 40 years. and had ended in a bad way. And here, here's this woman who never knew that all of this music had been pouring out of Walter because of her. And so for her to allow herself to, it's so vulnerable. And we had a screening where, one of the Q&As I said, singing in public and deciding to do that is incredibly vulnerable. So you've got that on one hand with Walter, but this woman saying that she would participate and bare her soul for us is equally as vulnerable as going up and singing. And I think those two things together, the last 30 or 40 minutes of the movie is just there's so much more depth and meaning because she decided to participate. And I'm very thankful that she did.
Yeah, it adds so much to have her there and have her at the performance, but that scene you're talking about, like it's incredible. It is so emotional across the board. And yet like I love the term vulnerable. You said vulnerable is totally accurate. I remember when she walked in, I didn't expect that. I just thought it'd be like, "Oh, it's great to see you." But it goes this place. It's just incredible. It's just a beautiful scene. Um,
Yeah, yeah, and I had no idea that's what we had
yeah.
until we looked at the footage and until the editor, Mike J. Nichols, put it together for the first time and I watched it and I still couldn't believe we got it because I wasn't in the room. I was literally down the hall trying to, and they were talking normal. I couldn't quite hear them, but even like the other night we were at a screening and the people start talking to each other during that scene like, oh, she cheated on him. It like becomes this whole conversation with the audience while that scene is going on. And I really think it's I've been in documentaries a long time. I've seen a lot of documentaries. I don't know if I've ever seen like a reconciliation scene that plays out so naturally, so organically. I mean, I couldn't have written that scene for a narrative scripted film. And it really was just this true moment of Walter needed that. He needed to talk to her. He needed to get some closure on that. And to think about 40 years after the fact, getting closure it's really a special moment in the film.
It truly is. It truly is, Ed. And I know we're starting to run out of time, but I wanted to ask you one more thing. Tying this with King of Kong for one moment. One of the things I see, and one of the things that makes these films so magical, to me anyway, is the joy of the everyday hero. And I feel like that's part of the joy, part of the magic of these two films. I was wondering if you could speak to that from spending time with these people, but the joy of the everyday hero for these, I want to say characters, but real men.
It's interesting. I mean, I certainly thought about that with King of Kong because Steve Wiebe is, just this plucky guy who's a math teacher and, taking on the man. So I definitely saw that, but I hadn't really thought about that until you mentioned that about Walter, that it's really relatable what he's doing. All of us have had a dream. All of us have wanted to write a novel. All of us have wanted to act in a play. All of us have wanted to be a singer song. All of us have had those types of dreams. And a lot of us never come through, never get a chance to do it, or sort of have reasons not to do it. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think what Walter does in this movie is very relatable. And I think you're right. He's just a normal guy, just living his life in Iowa. I mean, he's a unique person, let's, clearly. Um, but I hadn't really thought about that for this movie. But you're right. There is a complete parallel between Steve Wiebe and Walter Day in these two movies. They're just, people root like crazy for Steve Wiebe and they root like crazy for Walter in this movie. So you're right. There is a complete parallel between the two. I hadn't really thought about it until now.
Well, honestly, it's what I love most about this film and Walter, and I really appreciate the chance to chat with you about it. Arcades and Love Songs, such a beautiful film. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate your time.